Last month, a very important study on universal basic income, or UBI, concluded. And in my opinion, the main conclusion from that paper should be that UBI makes people poorer. But in almost every piece of media that I have read about this study, people are pretending like that shouldn't be the main takeaway of the study. So in today's video, I want to talk about UBI, that study, and misrepresentation of research findings in the media. Let's get into it. So let's start with what is UBI, or Universal Basic Income. So UBI is the idea that one of the best ways to help poor people is to simply just give them cash. It's actually a very sensible idea on paper. The logic tends to work something like this, is that the reason why poor people tend to stay poor throughout their whole lives is because they only have enough money to cover their very basic needs. And so all of their time, money, and effort is spent on simply surviving, which means they're not able to engage in things that will improve their long-term earning potential and help them get out of a state of poverty. Basically, the argument is that the poorest in our society are so concerned with covering the very basics of surviving, like how do I pay for food, how do I pay for my shelter, my rent, and how do I pay for my heating, that they're unable to invest in things that increase their long-term earning potential, increase their ability to move up in the economic ladder, which means that these people are never able to invest in things like training, education, or a car, which might increase their earning potential in a more indirect way. And so the argument is that if you just give people enough cash to cover these very basic needs, or at least most of them, then that will free up enough of their time, money, and resources where they can then focus on improving their human capital and increasing their long-term earning potential, which can hopefully then mean that these people will then make it out of poverty. And this isn't like some crazy new like woke culture gone mad concept. It's actually a very old idea. So Julius Caesar, all the way back in 46 BC, actually had a version of UBI going on in the Roman Empire. He gave each Roman citizen 100 denarii. And yes, if you're wondering, I do think about the Roman Empire quite a lot. And since Roman times, many different thinkers, philosophers, economists have also thought of very similar versions of UBI. A couple notable examples would be Milton Friedman, who's actually generally regarded as a very right-wing economist, but he actually also advocated for a version of UBI in the form of a negative income tax. And more recently, American politician Andrew Yang also proposed a version of UBI which he called the freedom dividend. So the people in favor of UBI are actually very smart people, and they make very sensible arguments in my opinion. And the evidence from other UBI trials that have taken place in other parts of the world, mainly in like third world countries, have shown a lot of promising evidence when it comes to UBI. They show that in general, people who receive this money spend it well, improve their lives in meaningful long-term ways, and increase their earning potential. Also, as long-term viewers of this channel will know, I'm trained as a behavioral economist, and so I can tell you that UBI also makes sense from a psychological point of view. There's a pretty famous behavioral economist, a guy called Senthil Mullainathan, who wrote a book called Scarcity, The True Cost of Not Having Enough. I'll have a link to it in the description if you're interested, not sponsored at all. But basically the argument that Senthil makes in his book is that poor people aren't just struggling financially, but actually being poor actually has a very significant effect on your, what he calls your mental bandwidth, basically your ability to allocate your brain power towards more long-term planning. So what people in extreme poverty end up doing is engaging in a lot of short-term trade-offs where they do a lot of things that improve their short-term position because that's what's most important to them, surviving. But actually those things mean that they get stuck in this cycle of poverty, which means that in the long run, they and their family are never able to make it out of poverty. So for all of these reasons, which I've been aware of for a long time now, I was actually a very big supporter of UBI. I thought it made a lot of sense. The evidence looked good from third world countries. The people who were advocating for it were very smart people who I look up to. And I should also mention there's another argument, which is that UBI will greatly improve the efficiency of the welfare system, because currently the welfare system is very complicated, the incentives are very messy, and UBI is often proposed as a replacement for the existing welfare system, which would greatly simplify it. Basically, everybody, no matter who you are, everybody gets the same amount of money. It's really simple, it's really clean, it's really fair. The amount of bureaucracy that's involved is significantly reduced, and so there's a lot of sort of government efficiency gains, small government kind of arguments that are also being made in favor of UBI. So UBI is great, right? Everyone should be doing UBI. America should do UBI. Britain should do UBI. Everyone should be doing UBI. right? Well, that's why I'm making this video, because up until last month, we hadn't seen a really large-scale, robust UBI trial that looked at how UBI would work in a more developed economy like America. Like, we know how UBI would work in extremely poor Liberian communities, and I'll talk more about that study in Liberia later. But what about America? What about Americans? How do Americans react to UBI? And that's what this study was looking at. How do Americans react to UBI? Well, this study showed, drum roll please, UBI makes Americans poorer. Yeah. I know, it's completely contrary to all the arguments I just gave you about UBI, but that's why I wanted to make this video. So next we're going to get into the details of this very important study. What did it exactly show? Why am I saying that it showed that Americans would get poorer? But first, I need to thank the sponsor of today's video, which is Flexispot. So if you're a long-term viewer of this channel, you're probably wondering why I am standing for this video rather than sitting. And that's because Flexispot are a company that makes standing desks, and they recently sent me their E7 Pro desk, and my camera is on top of the desk in the standing position, which allows me to stand while I'm talking. There's a lot of features I really love about the E7 Pro desk. Most importantly, I love the smooth action. As you can see, this action is really, really smooth. I also love the hand control features that allow me to preset 4 different heights to make height adjustment really easy. And the E7 Pro also comes with a cable management tray to keep the under of my desk nice and clear of cables. Now the E7 Pro also has a very high load bearing capacity, 160 kilos. So it even works with me, a pretty heavy guy, sitting on it. See? All good. And of course, the main benefit of having a standing desk like the E7 Pro from Flexispot is that it allows me to stand up while I am working. As I'm sure many of you are aware, a lot of us are sitting far too much these days, and it's not very good for our health. So standing while working is a lot healthier, and I do find myself standing a lot more since I got this Flexispot E7 Pro. So if you'd like to get one for yourself, head over to my link in the description, flexispot.co.uk. Right now, Flexispot are offering a massive discount for September, so be sure to get in there before that expires. There's many different configurations of desk you can get as well. I got the white legs with the black walnut top, but they have many different countertops depending on what your personal style is. So be sure to check out the link in the description. Thank you Flexispot for the desk. Thank you for sponsoring today's video. Let's get back to talking about this UBI study from Open Research. So this very expensive, very comprehensive study lasted 3 years. Here's how it worked. Open Research, the company who did this research, more about them later, they did the following. They selected 3,000 families from the Dallas area in Texas and from around Chicago in Illinois, and they allocated them into 2 different groups. 1,000 of the participants were in the UBI group. So these 1,000 people received $1,000 per month for 3 years. This $1,000 is gifted, so there was no tax on this money. They didn't affect any of their other benefits. It's just a clean $1,000 straight into these people's bank account over 3 years. And if you do the math, $1,000 a month for 3 years, that's $36,000. Whereas the other 2,000 people in the sample were the control group, and these people were given only $50 a month, which if you do the math on that, $50 a month for 3 years, that's only $1,800 at the end of the 3 years. And so throughout this study, including most importantly at the very end, the researchers did a lot of surveys asking these people about how they spent their money, how their income was, and looked at many other different measures to do with these different people. And it makes sense why they measured so many different things. After all, this is an extremely expensive study that you don't really want to be replicating every week. And so, they want to get as much data as possible. But also, in my opinion, they measured so many different things in this study that it was basically impossible for them to not be able to spin the results of this study in a way that made UBI look favorable at the end. Like, because they're simply measuring so many different things, at least some of those things are going to look slightly positive, which means that they can spin a positive story no matter what the true outcome of the study actually is. So they measured a lot of different things, but here are the ones that I think are the most important measures, but simultaneously are the ones that I see reported about the least in the media that I've read about this study. So the first one is that the people who received the full UBI, who received the full $1,000 a month, ended up earning $1,500 less on average compared to the control. And yes, if you're a stats nerd, all of these things I'm going to talk about are statistically significant. And so you're probably wondering how that's possible, right? Aren't the people who receive this UBI supposed to be using it in a way that increases their human capital, increases their training, education? So maybe that's why they have a decreased income. Is it that they stopped working and are now in education or training? Other than the very youngest people in the study, actually no, that's not what we observe at all. Instead, the vast majority of participants who received this money were just simply working less, about 1.3 to 1.4 hours per week less on average, and instead they were spending more of their time on leisure activities. Yeah, leisure activities, not education, not training, not skills that would improve their earning potential, not networking or anything like that. No. They're spending their time on leisure activities. And it's actually pretty sad because the researchers actually specify in their paper that they tried really hard to find some kind of positive human capital improvement from the research participants. They literally say in the paper, despite asking detailed questions about amenities, we find no impact on quality of employment, and our confidence intervals can rule out even small improvements. I mean, to me, that is a complete failure from the human capital argument for UBI, which is the main argument for UBI. And the picture gets a lot worse when we look at people's net worth and their wealth as well. As you may or may not be aware, wealth inequality is arguably the biggest threat to the collapse of the American economy and the British economy and many other economies across the world. Basically, when we talk about wealth, we're not talking about people's income. So I'm not talking about your salary or your job here. When we talk about wealth in economic terms, we're talking about assets. We're talking about the house that you own, the land under your house. We're talking about stocks in companies. We're talking about the actual productive things in society that are not people. The inequality when it comes to wealth is just way, way, way larger than the inequality in income. And these things are really important because these are the things that actually provide long-term financial security for people. For example, the easiest thing to understand is that if you own your house, then even if you lose your job and you don't have any income, you can still live in your house because it's your house. But if you rent where you live and you can't pay your rent, then you get kicked out of where you rent. And if you own your house but you own it with a massive mortgage and you can't keep up with your interest payments, then guess what? You also get kicked out. So owning assets and increasing people's net worth is really important for financial security and stability in the long run. And so do we see that the people who received £36,000 for free have any increase in net worth? No. In fact, it's even worse than no. The people who received UBI were on average $1,000 lower in net worth compared to the people who received only $50 a month, which is just absolutely insane, right? Imagine you got two identical friends, identical everything, life, looks, job, everything identical, and you give one of them $1,800 and you give the other one $36,000, and then you come back 3 years later and the guy who you gave $1,800 to is richer than the guy who you gave $36,000 to. Like, how is that possible? So surely this is like the most surprising, interesting finding from the study, right? It's so counterintuitive that surely this should be the headline of all the media that's talking about this study, that if you give people more money for free, they actually end up poorer after 3 years. Okay, but what about financial resilience, right? Because one of the worst parts about being poor is your inability to absorb shocks. If you're very poor, you have zero savings, then you're basically just one bad day away from everything falling apart. You could be in a car accident, maybe you have an emergency medical bill, maybe there's a leak in your roof. Very ordinary things, like horrible things, but ordinary random things that happen to everybody. Just one of those bad things happening to you and suddenly you're in a lot of financial trouble. So when we're assessing the quality of schemes that improve people's ability to get out of poverty, we're looking at these key indication markers of, are people able to absorb more financial shocks? Are they less likely to fall into serious negative financial outcomes? And you would think that giving the poorest in our society $36,000 for free would improve that. But no. As you can see from what the researchers wrote in their conclusion, the lack of improvement in net worth described above, combined with the small effects on credit access and the null effects on credit delinquencies, bankruptcies and foreclosures, suggest that the transfer did not improve participants' long-run financial position. So as some of you will know, I work at a bank, that's my day job. So some of you might be thinking that, oh, Pete's probably loving this, a guy who works at a bank, because all these guys who work in skyscrapers, they're all just snakes in suits, you know, they're all heartless fools, they love kicking people out of their house when they go bankrupt. Like, they love that stuff. But let me tell you, the last person who wants you to lose your house is the bank. It is much better for the bank who gave you the mortgage for you to complete that mortgage, for you to make your interest repayments over the full term that you agreed when you signed up to the mortgage, rather than having to kick you out of your house and sell your house instead. When banks have to repossess an asset in order to, make back some of the money on that loan that they gave out, it costs a lot of money, right? You got to pay the guy firstly to kick you out of the house, then you got to pay people to make the house sellable, then you got to pay the agent to sell the house, and you're usually selling the house at a really low price, like the absolute lowest that you can reasonably sell it at, in order to make a quick sale. But that often means that you're not making that much money back, and all of this means that the bank actually ends up earning less money compared to if you were just in a good financial position and were able to pay off your mortgage like you agreed when you first signed for the mortgage. So it is better for everyone, you as the homeowner, the bank as the lender, and just the global economy as a whole, if everyone is in a more healthy financial position and is able to make their full loan repayments and doesn't go into bankruptcy. So if you're wondering if the banks are celebrating from this finding, they absolutely are not. The financial sector would rather that $36,000 free dollars would actually improve your delinquency, bankruptcy, and foreclosure rate, but it doesn't seem to. So to me, when I'm reading these papers, I'm like, this is a catastrophic failure of UBI, right? The whole point, the whole main argument of UBI is that you stop people worrying about how they're going to survive, which means that they can then engage in long-term planning, which should improve all of these markets. But yet we see the opposite. So to me, as someone who reads research, who talks about it here on YouTube, who's trained in economics, who works at a bank and thinks about people's personal finances kind of all day long, this is a massive disaster. But yet, and the reason why I wanted to make this video, is that when you read about this study in the media, that's not the picture you get at all. If you go on the Open Research website, which is the company that did this research, the top headline for their webpage is "Cash Increases Possibility." If you look at the Bloomberg article, the conclusion to one of the top paragraphs is the main line that the researchers have been touting, which is "Cash increases flexibility." An outlet called The Register talked about it like this: Sam Altman's basic income experiment finds that money can indeed buy happiness. Very weird interpretation of the findings, in my opinion. And perhaps one of the worst offenders that I've seen is from USA Today, where they say, again, the main line of the research is UBI increases flexibility. And then they go on to list some top bullet point takeaways from the study. And in my opinion, all of these bullet points are focusing on what should be classified as secondary outcome measures, but yet those are the ones that are getting all the spotlight. For example, one of these top takeaway bullet points on USA Today was that people who received UBI were 10% more likely to go to the dentist. Like, why is that one of the top takeaways from the study, but you haven't even mentioned the fact that the people who received $36,000 for free ended up with $1,000 lower net worth compared to the control group? Like, surely that net worth point is a lot more poignant than the fact that people are more likely to go to the dentist. Like, the quality of reporting on this, the research, the prioritization has just been absolutely ridiculously poor. So now we get to the question of why. Why are the researchers who did this study so keen to push this message of cash increases possibility and flexibility, rather than what I take away from the study, which is that UBI makes people poorer? Well, the reason is because this study was done by Open Research, a company which was founded by Sam Altman, who many of you will know is the CEO of OpenAI, the creators and owners of ChatGPT. And so the reason why Sam Altman is so interested in UBI is because while the technology that he and his company are working on, ChatGPT and the other AI tools, are undoubtedly going to put a lot of us out of work very soon. And by very soon, I mean like within the next 5 to 10 years. So, while I'm still in my early 30s, it's quite likely that I will be struggling for a job despite being a very highly qualified individual. And statistically speaking, you're likely to be in a similar situation as well, as are most people in society. So it's a very scary future that we face, that a vast number of the jobs that currently exist are just going to be completely taken over by AI. It's kind of like when the tractor was introduced into farming. Before you needed, if you wanted to plow a field, you needed hundreds or thousands of workers to work a field in order to plow it. And then now you introduce a tractor and suddenly one guy with the tractor can just plow the whole field way faster and way better. Well, that's kind of like what AI is doing, but to the services sector now. It's AI is the new tractor and we're the idiots with the hoe in the field, and we're all going to be out of work really soon. So what happens when there's very few jobs left that can't be done by an AI, or can't be done more efficiently with an AI and a guy rather than 25 people. Well, that means that basically there'll be hardly anybody with a job, which means there'll be hardly anybody with an income, which means that the whole economy is going to collapse, right? If there's nobody has an income, nobody could spend anything, nobody can buy anything, nobody can live, that's the collapse of the economy, right? And so one of the proposed solutions by these developers of AI to this problem is UBI, Universal Basic Income. So nobody has to work and the government just gives you money, gives you income for free for not working, and then everybody has an income and the economy can keep on going. It's kind of a solution, still a pretty bleak future in my opinion, but at least it's better than nothing. And so Sam Altman is very motivated to make UBI sound like a really good idea, and by extension the people who work for him over at Open Research are then also very motivated to make UBI sound really good, because the person who pays their salary is motivated to do that. Basically, when people in the government take serious note that this is what's going to happen to the economy in the next few years, they're going to go to Sam Altman and other AI people and say, like, isn't this going to ruin the whole economy? And then Sam Altman's going to be like, collapse the economy, haha, you've activated my trap card, UBI. So that's why the researchers have cobbled together this medley of like secondary outcome measures that they've done and put them all together in a package to make UBI sound like way more positive than it actually was in this particular scenario. In the actual paper, to be fair, they're quite open and explicit about it, but in all the media, in OpenAI's website and all this stuff, they really sweep these negative findings under the rug, and the things that they bring to the fore are all of these things which, in my opinion, are secondary measures and not the most important outcome from the study. So what does this mean for UBI? Is it completely cooked? Well, in my opinion, not exactly. Firstly, there was a couple things that make the results of this study a little bit shaky and a bit questionable how generalizable they are. The main one being that this study took place between 2020 and 2023, and I don't know if you heard, but there was kind of this other thing going on during that time that might have made the economy a little bit weird, the pandemic. And so, how generalizable these findings are to a normal running economy that isn't in complete lockdown, maybe it warrants further research, although further research is of course very expensive. And the second reason why I don't think UBI is completely cooked is because personally, I'm not a very big fan of the $1,000 a month model of UBI. For people who are sort of interested in UBI research and like sort of debate around UBI, there's kind of two camps. There's the UBI monthly income camp, which is what the study was looking at, but there's also the lump sum camp. So basically in the lump sum camp, you're saying rather than give people a little bit of money every month, give them the total amount of money that you were going to give them, but give it to them all at the beginning. So for example, receiving $12,000 in January, but then nothing throughout the rest of the year, rather than receiving $1,000 a month. It's still $12,000 at the end of the year, but the way that people receive it is very different. And in my opinion, I think lump sum is much better, simply because a lot of the things that you need to do in order to improve your human capital costs more than $1,000. For example, if you wanted to buy a decent car that would then allow you to access jobs that were in locations that required you to have a car, or at the very least would allow you to become an Uber driver, which maybe is a higher earning job than whatever you're doing right now. If you had $12,000 up front, then suddenly that way of increasing your productive capacity becomes possible. Whereas if you have to save up $1,000 every single month over 12 months, then there's a lot more chances for that money to disappear somehow, right? Maybe you have some kind of other bill that you end up using the money for. Maybe your friend asked for the money. Maybe you're tempted to spend it on leisure activities, which is what exactly the behavior that we saw in this study. People were spending their money on leisure activities rather than things that were improving their human capital. So because this extra income is coming more slowly and there's more chances to, get siphoned off from other different costs, then that means at the end of the year you're still stuck in the same low paying job and you don't have a car because you weren't able to make that upfront investment. So that's why I'm a big fan of lump sum. I also mentioned that study in Liberia that looked at universal basic income as well. Obviously Liberia, a completely different economy to America. In Liberia, these people who were receiving universal basic income were living in huts that had grass roofs, and one of the main things that they used their universal basic income to do was to upgrade their roofs into metal roofs. Now, why is that a big deal? Well, because it turns out these grass roofs that this whole village is using are pretty bad roofs. Like, they don't keep out the rain properly, they leak, and also they get damaged, and so they have to be replaced every single year, which is very expensive for the people who live in this village because they need to buy a very specific type of grass in order to make the roof which doesn't even keep the water out very well. So it's just like a very rubbish way of living, and a bunch of their time and money gets spent on just maintaining this rubbish roof. And so when they received this this UBI, this sort of lump sum of money, they were able to upgrade their roof to a metal roof, which then instantly increases their earning potential, right? Because now they're not having to waste their money on buying grass, and also they're not having to waste their time in repairing their roof. And what they found in this study in Liberia was that actually when you give the money in monthly installments, that the local people in the village actually formed a kind of like roundabout way of turning that monthly income into a lump sum. So basically what they would do was they would huddle their monthly incomes together and then give it to one person in the village each month, and sort of go around in a circle that way, so that each month one person in that village could upgrade their roof to a metal roof. And so even when they tried to give the money in monthly sums, the people in this village ended up seeing the benefit of lump sums even more, and so did that amongst themselves. Now, I imagine that these sort of very poor, small Liberian communities are a lot more tight-knit than what you might expect around Dallas or around big cities like Chicago. And so I wouldn't expect this kind of cooperative behavior to be as strong in those communities as we saw in Liberia. But nevertheless, the argument of why a lump sum is more beneficial than in monthly payments, I think still stands. At the very least, you can see that if you were to receive $12,000 in January, then you can spend those $12,000 immediately to pay off the principal of any loans that you own. So then at least you're not accruing interest on the principal of that loan over the next 12 months, which means that that money ends up going a lot further. Compared to if you were to use all $1,000 that you received to pay off the principal of your loan over 12 months, you're still ending up paying more in interest by the end of the year. Hopefully that's clear to you. So what's the conclusion? My main conclusion is that I am very skeptical of research claims in the media. I think the media often reports on things in a very poor way. If I'm reading about research that I really care about, I always try to make an effort to look at the actual paper, if possible, if it's not paywalled, or at the very least think about who is doing this research, who is funding it, do they have any ulterior motives? Because by considering these different questions, you're going to get a much more balanced and complete view of what to take away from this research. But what do you guys make of this UBI study? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.